Sumaya Hassan and you are watching Aspire. Today we are talking about education. To help us plan for the future, we need to understand the past. Some of the institutions in the Muslim world that were offering education became global centers of learning excellence, and many of these exist even today. So for example, we have Al-Qayrawan and Al-Zaytuna in Tunisia. We have Al-Azhar in Egypt. We have Al-Karawiyin in Fez, Morocco. These are institutions that have been there for centuries. And for centuries, they have been known as centers of excellence, not only for the Muslim world, but as global centers of excellence. What we find, therefore, is that they attracted a multitude of students from far beyond their borders. And this is not a new phenomenon from when these institutions were established. So, for example, in the 9th century, when we look at Qurtuba in Andalusia, which was the center of Andalusia, or the capital, also known as Cordova now, the Department of Theology had around 4,000 students, just one department, with the entire university having around 11,000 students. This is in the 9th century. Compare that to the numbers that you know about some of the universities we have today to understand just how widespread knowledge and learning was in the Muslim world. Al-Azhar, on the eve of the British occupation, had around 7,600 students. It had more than 200 professors. So what was being taught in the mosques and in these early learning centers? The religious studies, yes. Islamic sciences, yes. But they were taught arithmetic. They were taught different liberal arts. They were taught legal sciences. Astronomy and engineering, for instance, was taught at Al-Azhar, including medicine. We have Ibn Tulun in Egypt teaching grammar, rhetoric, logic, astronomy, jurisprudence, mathematics, and medicine was being taught in Zaytuna alongside the religious studies. So the learning that was going on within the universities was extremely wide, extremely deep, because these were being taught in today's terms, we would say, you know, at a doctoral level in some of those institutions. And this was not only, I mean, if you look at the institutions I've mentioned, you have institutions in North Africa, you have institutions in the south of Spain. If we look at Baghdad, for instance, the students were being taught pharmacology, they were being taught engineering, astronomy in the mosques. And we had students from all over the world traveling to these different institutions to learn. The knowledge was universal. The thirst for knowledge was the other hallmark in the Islamic civilization. In fact, learning was held in such high esteem that both teachers and pupils were very greatly respected by the masses. It was a sign of honor for you to be a teacher, for you to be a student. Among the wealthy, whether they were merchants, whether there were those who owned property, one of the things that they had as wealthy people was collections of large private libraries, because it was regarded as one of the marks of a gentleman was to be learned. And so you wanted to be learned because then it showed that you were a gentleman, that you were refined. And so they had private libraries, but the mosques had public libraries for the masses to be able to access. And people learned everywhere. So studies went on and learning went on in the mosque, in the hospital. While people were being treated, there were places where you could go and learn. In hospitals had libraries. Observatories were built, madrasas. And then after the scholars finished teaching in the mosques and in the universities and wherever else they taught, they went home and had other sessions where people would come home to learn. So people were always learning. And what you find is that the history of the Muslim rulers during this time, they wanted to follow the Quranic and prophetic commands and traditions like what I've mentioned. And therefore they had a principle that every Muslim child must learn. And they invested tremendous amounts of resources in learning institutions and learning in general. And you will find details of rulers providing boarding and food and accommodation facilities for students so that you didn't have to worry about that. You would just concentrate on getting the studies. You would find business people, coming together and contributing. And it was just a very deep and intense tradition of acquiring knowledge. In fact, it is said that at that time it was very difficult to find a Muslim who could not read or write. Very difficult. It just wasn't done. Everybody was involved in seeking some form of education, and therefore you could read and write. When we look at some of the effects, therefore, of having this tradition of such a deep literary tradition, of course, the number of schools that were established. We had numerous schools, whether they are technical schools, whether medical schools, whether vocational schools. Libraries were all over the place. Books were easily available for people. Literature flourished. Poetry flourished. Art flourished. And then we find beautiful buildings being built. And really, these have stood the test of time. They are still there with very distinctive Islamic features. Islamic art was cultivated. There were hospitals and observatories. There were centers for intellectual discourse, and as a result you will find that some of these Muslim cities like Qurtuba actually became the civilization capital of not only Spain but the West in general, and people would come from all over the world to these areas to gather the knowledge, to gather the information, and to exchange ideas with the scholars who were there as well. Young men from Europe, particularly from Italy and France, would compete to enroll in the Islamic universities in Andalusia, in the south of Spain. They wanted to get into the universities. Just like today, there are certain universities that always make the top list. At that time, it was those Muslim universities. Interestingly, and just to show that tolerance, because this was a period that was marked by very high religious tolerance, one of the students of the university in Qurtuba was Gerbert. Gerbert later became known as Pope Sylvester II. He studied at the Islamic University in Qurtuba, and subsequently he took what he learned from there, including the science of mathematics and Arabic numerals, back into Italy and introduced actually this into Italy. The other interesting thing that many people don't realize is that when the students from non-Muslim countries from Europe graduated from the Islamic universities and returned home, they would dress in the Arab or the Muslim robes. You know, the thobes, the kanzus as we call them here. They would dress in this because this indicated that they were graduates from these very esteemed universities. This influence can be seen today. And if you look at graduation gowns of any university around the world, it's the long flowing robes. That has its history directly in the Islamic civilization of the robe and the gowns and the thobe, because it is a sign of scholastic integrity. It was then, and this has continued. So anytime now you have a serious intellectual discourse, you will find people wearing the gowns and the robes. This has its history in Islamic civilization. So this is our history. We wanted to just capture this in a snapshot to see where have we come from. So going forward, what are some of the things we can do to start recapturing this glorious period where we really were at the forefront as an Islamic civilization of a lot of developments in the world? One of the first things I want to urge you and our viewers at home to do, read a book. Read a book, and I want you to ask yourself, you don't need to give me an answer here, how many books did you read last year? And when I say read, for those of you here, here, and those at home who are parents, your child's diary at school does not count as a book. Even though you're reading the comments the teacher has written, that is not the type of book I mean. I mean reading a book cover to cover and actually finishing it and not just going to the end to read the last chapter. How many have you read? And I urge you, read widely. You've seen, we've gone through a journey of the different subjects that were taught in the mosques, from religion to science to language to mathematics to astronomy. So read widely. In fact, Imam Ghazali told us that the Prophet ﷺ regarded any day as lost in which he did not increase in that day knowledge that would draw him closer to his Lord. So when you want to know what should I read, I suggest to you a very simple test. Can you say Bismillah before you read it? If you can, then please go ahead, read. Read it. It doesn't have to have been written by a Muslim. Read widely, expand your mind, understand what else is happening in the world, but read in the name of your Lord. Anytime you open the book, start with Bismillah. If you find that Bismillah cannot go with the content of what you are reading, you probably should not be reading that book. So do a self-check. I urge you as well, beyond reading, let us go back to our tradition of discussions. In the mosques, people had halaqas. You would have a study circle like this is a halaqa. It's a study circle. So we would come and we would read and discuss something and challenge each other and have the intellectual discourse going. Start doing that. As you read, find a group of similar-minded and not so similar-minded, because we want to encourage each other to sit and have a discussion. This could be in the form of a book club. So we run a book club and we meet monthly to discuss a book, and perhaps subsequently what we will do is share with the viewers the book we are reading in that month, so that you can also even virtually join in the book club. But the idea is, let us expand our circles to include circles of knowledge where we sit and actually have discourse on books and intellectual material that we are reading. The other thing we need to do as an ummah and as a society, we need to form institutes for intellectual thinking. Right now we are bombarded with social media where all we do is forward. You know, and I like this new thing that has come up on WhatsApp that actually shows when you're forwarding something, because it just shows you that very little effort in initiative and creativity goes on even in the social media space. We are just forwarding. You know, we need to step back. For us to be able to reimagine the future, we have to be part of creating it. But where are the centers of intellectual discourse? What is the path that the ummah is going down on? Where do we want to be in the next 10, 20, 30 years? What is our philosophy as an ummah? And who is thinking about this? There are centers for intellectual thought that need to be established, where thinkers just sit and they think and they discuss and they research and write policy and inform strategy, and we need to reestablish that. We are very good at complaining when things are going not our way, but the only people who will change our narrative is ourselves. And for us to be able to do that, we have to be in charge of the narrative. We have to be researching, we have to be writing, we have to be thinking, we have to be discoursing, and this is part of the thing that we need to do. For those who are not able, for one reason or another, to do that, what else can they do? Why not support a student? For the viewers at home, there are very many students out there who have a deep thirst for knowledge, but they don't have money for food, they don't know where they're going to stay. Whether you're women cooking something in your home that you sell, why don't you set aside some of that money to help a student somewhere finish their studies? For the business people as well, we urge you, we want you to fund research. We want you to fund and endure chairs. We want you to fund intellectual discourse in this country among the ummah, so that we can take ourselves back to where we were and beyond. I think the history of education and ilm in Islam is very clear that it required very systematic and deliberate effort by people wanting to do things. They imported paper from China to ensure that books were widespread. They built libraries, you know, they even took books from other cultures and translated them. We have to deliberately make a decision that we are going to universalize education among the ummah. Only then can we talk about changing our condition. Only then can we talk about reclaiming the status of this ummah at the forefront of civilization, and only then can we really have the type of impact in this world that should be had by people who have the best of characters and the best of manners. And finally, as we wind up Aspire, I would like to tell the viewers at home that we have a sponsor for today who has offered to provide scholarships to students who have done brilliantly well in their studies. They are very clear. If you are a Form 4 student and you have performed excellent, and that means excellent, yes, they are looking for A's and above, but you come from a needy background, At the end of this show, you will find our contacts. Please send us your details. The sponsor is interested in funding you they want to fund those who have finished primary school and need high school fees, and they also want to fund those who have finished high school and need support with university fees. May Allah accept this from them as sadaqatul jariyah, and we urge each of us to look at how else in our own individual ways we can also support education as these particular sponsors have. Wa jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.